Given our overall approach to apologetics, this is the truth and apologetic method that we want to discuss now, and we particularly will deal with the issue of truth about reality as knowable with respect to our overall argument itself. We'll first do the issue of truth, and then we'll, in a separate lecture, discuss the apologetic methods itself. We have some objectives for dealing with the issue of truth. By the end of this unit, you will be able to, 1, define the correspondence view of truth, 2, defend the absolute nature of truth, 3, critique the inadequate test for truth, and 4, explain the adequate tests for truth. First, let's deal with the issue of what is truth, and here we want to deal with the theory or understanding of truth, a definition of truth, which has to do with whether truth is absolute or relative. We want to deal with the truth as it applies to God in terms of methodology. And here, when we mention the term God, we are also dealing with different worldviews, but particularly dealing with the methodology, and then finally applying to that a test for truth, something that we can apply to all views of God or all worldviews that would be presented to us. What test can we use to test the different worldviews? First of all, there is truth to be said about truth itself. Truth is something that is ultimately undeniable and unavoidable, and this is important to point out to people in practice. Many people have the view that there are different truths for everyday matters in dealing with money and dealing with commerce and dealing with business, and we deal with truth there and have an understanding of truth there. But then when we deal with religious issues or people's views of God, sometimes it's put into a different category, thinking that because those things are not known with as greater certitude or everybody's different about their view of God, then we put that more in a category of tastes and opinions and other things. But actually, truth itself is undeniable, and if any truth claim is going to be made, then it's going to be made and it is testable and it is objective in that sense. People that would say there's no such thing as truth, and again, even if these are applied in the area of religion, these are what we would call as self-defeating, directly self-defeating statements, because it self-destructs on itself. To say that there is no such thing as truth, one would obviously ask, is that statement true? Is that a thing of truth in that statement? If someone says nothing is true, then you would look at that as being self-destructive as well. What about that very statement? Some would say no statement can express truth, but it would seem that that very statement expresses truth. So these are all statements that self-destruct. So truth, again, is unavoidable, and it's also undeniable. You can't get around the fact that truth does in fact exist. Even if we turn to religion or say things about God and start to think in terms of truth, such as there are no true statements about God, then someone would have to ask, is that a true statement about God? It seems to be. It has God in it. It's a statement about God, and someone's purporting or assuming it to be true. Again, truth even in religion is completely unavoidable. Truth is the same no matter what subject or field it is addressed to. A claim of truth that something is true is indeed undeniable and unavoidable in terms of it being stated, and that there must be such a thing as truth. Some things are true and some things are false. The reason for this has to do with the correspondence understanding of truth, or the correspondence theory of truth, which is really the only adequate explaining of what it means to be true, and this dates back to Aristotle. Aristotle put it more succinct than any other philosopher, and I could dare do any better. He said, to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false, while to say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not is true. This is the classical statement of the correspondence theory of truth. It simply holds that a belief or statement corresponds to a certain state of affairs in the real world. So here we are dealing with actual statements that make claims about reality or the way things are. Either God exists or God does not exist. Either I have $10 in my pocket or I do not have $10 in my pocket. These are, again, claims that make, or they're statements that make claims about a certain state of affairs, and hence are truth claims. And it either is true or not true, and only the correspondence understanding of truth is really able to account for what a truth claim is, and that something is true versus false. Now, there are some supporters of this, some ancient one, Aristotle, obviously, Aquinas following him. Some more modern people would be G.E. Moore and Alfred Tarski, who are modern philosophers. Mortimer J. Adler, I would definitely put in the category of philosopher as well, and more of a popular philosopher. These would all be supporters of the correspondence view of truth. In fact, Mortimer Adler reminds us, I'll quote him, that with respect to a correspondence theory of truth, the theory asserts two things that are important to understand. One is that there is a reality independent of the mind. That is, not everything is contained to the mind. There's no Kantian gap with regards to this issue. We won't deal extensively with that here. We'll deal more extensively with showing that there is no gap in terms of what philosophy can do when we discuss and do our metaphysics. But nonetheless, it's important to remember that here with regards to the issue of truth. And the second thing is that truth, or what is the same thing, knowledge, exists in the mind when the mind agrees with, conforms, or corresponds to that independent reality. When what I assert agrees with the way things really are, my assertions are true, otherwise they are false. As we'll discuss in our metaphysics, this is an understanding of truth and knowledge that is an act of knowing. It is not dependent upon a modern analytical justified true belief issue, but this is just an understanding that comes from the medievals with regards to realism that sees knowing something as an act of knowing, not just mere propositions, statements that are somehow separated from reality itself. What are the philosophical arguments for the correspondence views of truth? There are several things that we can say. Number one, without the correspondence view of truth, lies are simply impossible. Lies would not even exist if you did not have a correspondence view of truth. If one's statements need not correspond to the facts in order to be true, then any factual incorrect statement could in fact be true, and this is just absurd. And if this is the case, the lies become impossible because any statement is compatible with any given state of affairs. Without a correspondence, there would be no such thing as falsity. Truth and falsity become meaningless. In order to know something is true as opposed to something that is false, there must be a real difference between things and the statements about the things. But the real difference between thought and things is precisely what entails in a correspondence view of truth. And third, factual communication would ultimately break down without a correspondence view of truth. Factual communication depends on informative statements, but informative statements must be factually true. That is, they must correspond to the facts in order to inform one correctly. Since all communication seems to depend ultimately on something being literal or factual with regards to truth, then it would follow that all communication depends in the final analysis on the correspondence view of truth. And if the correspondence view of truth doesn't hold, then all communication ultimately breaks down. And fourth and finally, we'll point out that any other theory that one would come up with, any non-correspondence theory that one would come up with, ultimately, secretly depends on the correspondence view of truth. If I put forth any non-correspondence view of truth, at least hiddenly I'm making the assertion that this non-correspondence view of truth corresponds to the way we understand truth, and hence I'm secretly dependent on the correspondence view of truth, and it can be shown that any non-correspondence view that comes along really doesn't meet even its own criterion of truth. So there are basically two views of truth. You have correspondence and you have non-correspondence view of truth. With respect to the basis of the correspondence view, as we've stated, it's factual. Any non-correspondence view of truth that is brought up has a practical basis. The nature of it is propositional with regards to the correspondence view. For any non-correspondence view, it must be something else. It must be personal in all likelihood. The referent is, for the correspondence view, is reality itself. For a non-correspondence view, it's results. The medium of expression is obviously language. Any non-correspondence view is practical results or the experience in life. The location for the correspondence view is in the affirmation versus the non-correspondence view. It's ultimately in intentions. Again, as we've pointed out, any non-correspondence view that comes along is really secretly dependent on the correspondence view of truth. There really is no other option. So then we come to the issue of, is truth relative or absolute? Well, a relative truth we need to view can be understood in at least two ways. One, someone could say that all truth is relative to time and space. That is, it's true now, but it's not true then. It was true perhaps in the past, but it's not true today. And second, all truth is relative to persons. Sometimes this is referred to as perspectival truth. It's true for me, but it's not true for you. I feel warm, but not everybody else feels warm in the room, and not everybody really feels my warmth nonetheless. So this would seem to be a definitional of what one means by a relative truth. In contradistinction to that, we have an absolute truth, which implies at least two things. One, whatever is true at one time and in one place is true at all times and in all places. That means if it was true in the past, then it is true today that it was true in the past. Not that we have to insist that it's true right now if it was something in the past, but it was true in the past, and today we can certainly state that in the past it was true as well. And we can state that today. And second, that whatever is true for one person is true for all persons. That is, if I feel warm, even though everyone else doesn't feel my warmness or doesn't necessarily feel warm, that we have to look at the truth claim. The truth claim is that I feel warm and that I correspond to the truth claim itself, and everyone needs to recognize that that truth is true for everyone, that I feel warm, and not just something that is relative. So let's look at some problems with relativism. First of all, the issue of relative to time and space. What is true at one time and place, we need to understand, is really true always and everywhere. For example, if I say Reagan is president, and I imply that Reagan is president today, that's obviously false. But if I said that in 1985, it would have been true. And I can say today that Reagan was president in 1985, that is in the past, and that statement is always true everywhere and for everyone. It will never be true that Reagan was not president then and is president now. However, if it is true at all times and all places, then it is an absolute truth, not a relative truth. With the issue of relative to persons, what is true for one person is true for all persons. Example, if ancient men believed that the sun moved around the earth, then it is true for all men that ancient men believed this to be true. It doesn't entail the truth of what they believe. This does not mean that it was true in ancient times and is false now that the sun moves around the earth. But it is true that ancient men believed it, if indeed that's the case that they did. And we can speak of them believing it then, and we can speak of it being true with respect to their belief about that matter, even though was always the case that the earth moved around the sun back then as it is today, and that what people believe today is that the earth moves around the sun. So what is true for one person is really true for all persons. It will never be true for anyone, anywhere, at any time that ancient men did not believe the sun moved around the earth. Hence, there's nothing relative about that whatsoever. What is true for all persons, all the time and everywhere, is an absolute truth. And ultimately, again, there's nothing really relative about that. So again, the truth of the matter is, or to state it in short, is that there really is no such thing as a relative truth. Truth, by definition, must be absolute. I can remember when this was first stated in a class I took with Dr. Geiser. He gave the challenge to us of coming up with a relative truth, that if anybody could come up with a relative truth, he would give them $10. Now, I know this was several years ago, but $10 back then would have bought a seminary student probably 2 or 3 meals. So we tried our best to come up with a relative truth, and we're not able to do it. And you can't do it. You can talk about tall and shortness and comparisons. You can talk about feelings. But again, you have to look at what is being claimed. If Ben is taller than John, it's a comparison that's being made, and the truth is with respect to the fact that Ben is taller than John, and that will, given that both have stopped growing, always be true of what is being claimed with respect to that issue. It doesn't mean that something or anything, and it can't mean that anything is relative about these types of comparisons. Again, what's specific is to look at the truth claim. It doesn't mean that what everyone believes is necessarily true, but it is true that they do indeed believe certain things, and that's what's being claimed. But there's more problems with relativism. If relativism is true, then the universe would contain actually contradictory conditions of truth, which seems ridiculous in the final end. That something could be true here in the United States, and that same very thing could be false somewhere else in the world, such as over in Russia, is just ridiculous. You cannot conduct any sort of communication or acknowledgement or make truth anything that is universal if that indeed is the case. Ultimately, if it's the case that relativism is true, then nothing could be true, and that's true with respect to the problem of relativism as well. We also could never be mistaken or learn anything. What we might answer on a test today or think we know today could be overturned the very next day or in 5 years or 10 years. So learning things and being mistaken about things ultimately could not possibly be answered or addressed. Just think of the studies of various subjects that try to investigate things and how this would be completely impossible if relativism is true. You would never be able to define something like energy in science and say, well, this is what energy is. You could never definitively speak of that being the case in any sense. Historically, you could never speak of, well, who won World War II? Did the Axis or the Allied power win World War II? Well, maybe in Germany, they think that they won World War II. If that's the case, and truth is relative, then we could never show the contrary. But that goes completely against reason. We can, in fact, show the contrary to the issue at stake. There is such a thing as absolute truth, or there is such a thing as true answers to these kinds of questions, and that's because truth is ultimately absolute. Now, if, on the other hand, truth is absolute, as we have shown, there are important consequences, especially when considering religion. First, the law of non-contradiction, which should be symbolized as A is not non-A, states that opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. This is undeniable. Hence, if A is true, then that which is opposed to A must be false. Since everything cannot be false, something must be true. Hence, it must be the case that we can know truth. And this entails and shows us why opposite religions can't both be true. Since opposites cannot both be true, all religions cannot be true, since they hold opposing views on crucial differences. These would at least include the nature of God, the Bible being the inspired Word of God, humanity being sinful, Jesus being the Son of God, being both God and man, His death on the cross for our sins, and salvation alone being through Jesus Christ. All religions are opposed to those assertions that Christianity makes. Hence, if Christianity is true, everything in any other religion that opposes Christianity must be false. Hence, the true view must correspond to reality. And all truth, by definition, is narrow, since its opposite is false. Can one religion be true? The answer, of course, is yes. A false religion can express some truth or even have a system with some truth in it. But again, if Christianity is true, whatever is found in any other religion opposed to Christianity must be false. And that religion opposed to what is the true religion cannot also be the true religion. Truth can be found outside of Christianity, and truth can be found outside the Bible. But nothing can be true which is opposed to Christianity and the Bible. God has, for example, provided everyone basic truth about Himself through creation. And some might object that this is a narrow view or a narrow approach. But remember, all truth is narrow. If someone wants to assert that Islam is true or humanism is true, that's just as narrow a claim as what we are making with respect to Christianity. That's just the nature of truth. And again, opposite religions can't both be true. For example, if we compare Islam and Christianity, and we just as could have selected any other religion to compare with Christianity in these crucial areas. Islam says God is only one, and Christianity says God is triune, three persons in one God. Islam says the Bible is corrupted, Christianity says it's not corrupted. Islam says that humanity is good by nature, but Christianity says that we are sinful by nature. Islam says that Jesus was merely a man, not God, and Christianity, of course, says He is more than a man, He was also God. Islam says that Jesus did not die on the cross and did not rise from the dead. And of course, Christianity says and did physically rise again from the dead. And of course, they disagree on salvation. In Islam, it is faith plus works when good deeds outweigh one's bad deeds. But Christianity says that it's not by works, but is a free gift of God for all who believe. Now, these are crucial differences, and they cannot both be true, since one is affirming C is true and the other is affirming non-C is true. Hence, there's no way to reconcile them. Only one religion can be true, with these crucial differences found in all religions. Now, also, what about the issue of religious pluralism, or what we might call religious relativism? Even some would say that the truth that I've spoken on just applies to everyday matters. Like when I go to the bank, I want $10 that I put in to be $10 that's given back to me, and we expect that to make everyday transactions take place and there to be no problem. And that's the kind of truth I'm dealing with there. Some would argue that when we come to religion itself, because things seem to be less known with certainty than concrete matters such as commerce and business that's done, there we must throw out our absolute understanding of truth there, and here we need to look at it as being relative, open to different views, and not any one particular view having the complete say-so on what God is or what religion is true. But I'd like to suggest that there's an assumption with this understanding that a gap or a gulf exists between the perceived object and the perceiver. In other words, John Hick is known for putting forward this understanding. His term for God, or that which is ultimate, is the real, and he says that no religion has able to bridge this gulf or this gap that exists and know the real as it is in itself, or know its nature directly. That being the case, all of the religions are simply feeble attempts, flawed attempts, to ultimately explain the real. They may have some truths about it, but they don't know the real in itself. And if this sounds very similar to Immanuel Kant's understanding of reality and how we cannot know the thing in itself, it's exactly where he takes it from, and he gives credit to him for that fact. John Hick applies this to religion, while Immanuel Kant applied it to reality. So what about religious relativism or pluralism? Well, I'd like to suggest that there are problems, significant problems. First of all, there's a wrong starting point. John Hick wants to go right to the world religions of that exist in the world and start asking questions about them, and start at that point to see what they know about the real, in order to ultimately show that because they conflict in what they know about the different world religions, or what different world religions, say about God or the real, are conflicting, they couldn't possibly have the truth about them. So it's the wrong starting point. And also state it's a wrong methodology. Ultimately, Hick's methodology of discovering which religion or which approach to religion is correct is self-defeating. Because John Hick is stating that none of the world religions know the real in itself, but that implies that John Hick at least knows enough about the real to know that none of the world religions know about the real. So his system applied to the world religions isn't applied to himself, which is able to know at least something about it with respect to the different world religions, and the fact that they're all wrong and John Hick is right in his methodology or approach. And third, I think he uses the wrong evidence. He wants to look at what is common among the world religions and just adhere to that, which happens to be the moral teaching. In fact, I would correct his entire approach in terms of apologetics by stating that the right starting point is worldviews, and attached to that is a certain metaphysical understanding that allows us to adjudicate between worldviews by appealing to the natural process of reasoning that we all have access to. And second, the right methodology is to look at absolute truth with respect to not a relativistic understanding of truth, but an absolute understanding of truth, as I've argued for just previously. And then finally, we need to look at the right evidence ultimately in our approach to understanding and dealing with the issue of adjudicating between religions, and that is the issue of miracles. And once we establish a worldview context in terms of our metaphysical understanding, adjudicate the various worldviews, then miracles can ultimately be used as a sign from God, and the evidence for certain miracles can be compared and contrasted, and of course in the context of Christian apologetics, we would argue that Christianity is true based on its correct worldview, its absolute understanding of truth, and its unique miraculous evidence. But again, just to reiterate the point that I made earlier of what's the problematic with John Hick's approach is we need to understand that nothing but statements certainly imply more than knowledge. If you can make the statement that no religion understands the real in itself, of course this assumes that at least John Hick understands the real. And of course his system or of his methodology applied to all the world religions doesn't apply to himself. And no one can know the real in itself, as I pointed out before, is really self-defeating, because John Hick knows at least as much about the real to know that all the other world religions don't know it. So let's clarify this notion of absolute truth. First of all, one does not have to have absolute evidence in order for there to be absolute truth. I don't have to know all the truth about a system in order to know that truth is absolute. I don't have to have even all the evidence that supports a certain truth or a comprehensive understanding of it. Again, it's the claims that we look at with respect to what is being claimed to be true, and if it is true, if it does have evidence to support it, whatever the nature of the truth claim, whether it's a philosophical truth claim, a metaphysical truth claim, a historical truth claim, different kinds of evidence are going to be used to establish those different kinds of truth claims. But nonetheless, I don't have to have all or absolute evidence in order to establish those various truth claims. In fact, it would be impossible for me to know everything about every truth claim. No human being does. Only God would know something like that. Also, borderline or in-between conditions with regards to, as I mentioned before, such as I feel warm or I am warm, does not make truth relative, because again, you have to look at the truth claim. If I claim I'm short, that's in a context of a comparison with someone who is taller versus someone who's shorter than me. There's nothing relative about that because there's two different truth claims being made. If I say that I feel warm, I'm not making a truth claim about everyone else in the room. The truth claim that needs to be acknowledged is what I say about myself, that I feel warm, not that everyone in the room feels warm or feels my warmth. There can be differences there, but we have to narrow down or look at what is being claimed. It's also the case that claiming to believe something is true is not the same as a truth claim. Again, some people believe things that are not true, but it's true that they believe things that are not true. You have to, again, look at the truth claim. If I believe the earth is square, that's not a true belief, but it could be the case that I actually believe that to be the case, and my belief doesn't make it true. It's not the same, and not every belief needs to be true, and you have to look at what's being claimed. It's true that they believe it, even though the belief is wrong, or some beliefs obviously are true. Now we want to take a moment and outline what we're going to be doing for the rest of this lecture with regards to truth being applied to God. When we talk about truth being applied to God, we're dealing with the issue of worldview. There are different views of God, and each one is a separate worldview, and we'll be evaluating those in another lecture. But here what we want to do is deal with the issue of ultimately getting for a test of truth. What is put forward as a test of truth that can adjudicate or establish one worldview over and against another worldview? This is what the first part of Christian Apologetics by Dr. Geiser deals with, and in Chapter 8 he sets forth an adequate view of test. He expounds the different views of tests for truth, and then in Chapter 8 he puts forth to be an adequate test for truth. So what are the different options? Well, first, there are put forth two views that says that truth cannot be known. This we would look at as being self-defeating, and we'll show that to be the case in just a little bit. But some would say that truth cannot be known, so there's really no use even trying to test for it. Skepticism and agnosticism both fall into this category, David Hume and Immanuel Kant corresponding to each of those respectively. Skepticism, such as David Hume, says that we should doubt everything about God or everything about a worldview, since truth cannot be known in any ultimate sense. Agnosticism of Immanuel Kant would simply say we cannot know anything about God per se. So those are the first two views, which really aren't views of truth, but they are assertions we need to respond to that says truth cannot be known. Then there are those who put forward a test of truth or a test for truth that are just simply inadequate views. They might give us some insight into the issue of truth, but ultimately we have to recognize that they're inadequate. And the first one is rationalism. Rationalism, such as that is found in Benedict Spinoza and René Descartes, says that we can rationally prove everything about God, that we can put forth rationally inescapable proofs with regards to things about God or a worldview, and they just have to be true. This is known as rationalism. Almost the opposite of that is fideism. Søren Kierkegaard said that we must simply believe everything about God with no reasoning going on, no evidence going on. This is pure fideism. Then there's third, experientialism. Plotinus and Schleiermacher who say that we know truth by our experience of it, of the truth. Our experience with God would show us what is to be believed and known about God. And that alone is enough to establish truth for us. Evidentialism, Dodd and William Paley would say that we must look to historical, or Paley would say we must look to present or perhaps scientific facts to lead us to know God. Evidentialism would say if we look at history, like Dodd would say, if we look at history surrounding Jesus and the resurrection, that should lead us to conclude what is true about God simply based on historical evidence. Or William Paley would look at science and the world given to us, and that should ultimately lead us to know about God. Then fifth is pragmatism. William James put forth the notion that which works the best should be used to know about God, and this is a practical sense and somewhat of an individual sense. He would be saying that which works for the individual. If Christianity works for me in terms of who or what God is, then that is what I should believe and hold to. That truth is obviously relative in this understanding. Or if a pantheist or a Hindu, if that works for him, then he can stay with that. Combinationalism, Ramsey and Edward J. Carnell put forth this notion of combinationalism that basically says that all the tests for truth, at least 1 through 5, should be combined together, and various aspects of them be used in order to develop a system or a combinational system to know God. Sometimes this is called systematic consistency, but they want to put all the other tests that are put forward ultimately in order to come up with an adequate test for truth. So let's jump in and start evaluating some of these with respect to truth applied to God. First of all, we have skepticism, which says that we should suspend judgment since truth is unknowable. All truth is unknowable is the claim, but we have to ask at least 3 things about this. Number 1, is this a universal truth claim itself? Hume would say, David Hume would say that we should doubt everything about God. We cannot be applied to all truth claims, since skepticism is ultimately self-defeating. All truth is unknowable, it says. But we have to ask, so if this is a universal truth claim, then it self-destructs if that's the case, because it itself is a truth claim which ultimately should be doubted. We should be doubting skepticism, that is, itself. Some would say that this is just a particular truth claim. They wouldn't say that it's a universal truth claim. They would say it's just a particular truth claim. But if that's the case, then it doesn't eliminate a universal truth claim from being made, or a universal truth claim of a worldview being, or a worldview itself being universal and true for everyone. It just is a particular truth claim. So it leaves the door completely open if that's the case. And then some would say, well, no, it's not a truth claim at all. But then, of course, this leaves the door open as well, because we have to ask, can a statement about the knowability of truth be made, if that's the case with regards to this issue? So ultimately, I think this fails. One could certainly say we should be skeptical about skepticism itself, and it leaves the door open for sufficient evidence being put forward for a truth claim. Some would divide it this way into a hard skepticism that says you can't know anything, which of course one would doubt whether we know skepticism itself, and others would put it in the category of a soft skepticism itself. It's debated whether David Hume held to the hard or soft one understanding of it, but either way, the soft one simply says, maybe I don't know, but this of course leaves the door open. Hard skepticism is self-defeating, as we pointed out. Soft skepticism is somewhat reasonable. The person should be open to argument and evidence and to our apologetic reasoning if that indeed is the case. Hume himself admitted it was hard to be a skeptic because it can't be lived out completely and consistently, because one, of course, would need to be skeptical about skepticism itself. So ultimately, skepticism either is self-defeating or it doesn't completely address the issue of truth, leaving the door open for truth claims or worldview claims being true and being made. Immanuel Kant, agnosticism, there are two forms of this as well. One is a hard form that says all knowledge about reality is impossible, and then a soft form that just says some knowledge about reality is impossible. With respect to the hard form, the statement is self-defeating, just like skepticism. All knowledge is impossible is a knowledgeable statement, and so it self-destructs upon itself and with respect to its assertion. I put forward a knowledgeable statement about all knowledge is impossible. Well, this statement itself, by its own definition, is impossible. Every negative, not that, ultimately implies a positive that you know. If I know that all knowledge is impossible, then I'm the only one that has some knowledge, namely that statement, which makes it possible. Also, this assumes a gap or a gulf, as we've mentioned many times before, between mind and reality. And that is simply an assumption. What the problem with the gap issue, which we've mentioned before, is this issue of thinking that philosophy is somehow having to prove that an external knowable world exists. But a philosophy, if that's just not the job of philosophy, if philosophy just can't do that, then I just start with what is given, reality itself, and use philosophy only to be descriptive with respect to reality, or start with being, existence, and reality, and build my philosophy on that, rather than make the assumption of a gap that exists between knowable reality and my mind. Then there's the soft form, and of course the soft form we don't have much objection to, just like for skepticism. It certainly leaves the door open. Okay, there are some things about reality that are impossible to know, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other things about reality that are possible to know, namely that an adequate test can be put forth for truth, and we can adjudicate some things with regards to worldviews. Simply leaves the door open, of which we're on good grounds to pursuing the issue and question of truth itself. Now we'll look at the main issue of rationalism. The first one we'll look at with respect to an actual test for truth. Rationalism says that there's a strong form as well as a weaker form for this as well. The strong form says that everything can be proved by logically inescapable proofs. In response to that, we would say that there is no way to prove the very law of thought. The logic cannot be proved by logic. That's impossible. So it could not possibly be the case that everything can be proved by logically inescapable proofs. In fact, we can rationally, this view that would say that we could rationally prove everything about God wants us to be able to prove first principles themselves about God. But we have to realize that in a pure logical sense, it's possible logically that nothing ever existed or nothing exists. In reality, that's not the case, but it is a logical possibility. Descartes and Spinoza based their system on various axioms, starting points that themselves they did not prove or did not have proof for. How does reason alone choose between the two competing views if this view ultimately prevails? I don't think it can. The weak form is that which is non-contradictoriness is true, is put forward. So this puts forward that just things that are non-contradictoriness cannot be true. But this we put forth is only a test for falsity, Logic alone cannot prove that all views except one are contradictory. this form goes just too far, either the strong form or the weak form. First of all, the strong form, there are no rationally inescapable proofs for God. What we put forward is just the fact that it's reasonable that God exists. The proofs, we would certainly say, are undeniable. But it is not a logical contradiction or inconceivable for there to be no God. There's nothing in the proofs that forces me to the position of belief in God, simply because there are no rationally inescapable proofs for God. It has a logically non-existent existent possibility. There's no actual non-existent possibility. It is the case that we can put forth an argument for God, but it's not based, again, on logical necessity in the sense that it's inescapable, rationally inescapable. It's simply undeniable. You can't show that the argument is wrong or faulty in its logic and reasoning. That's what we mean by undeniable. So this, again, the entire system simply goes too far. Benedict Spinoza is a rationalist, but he argues for pantheism. René Descartes is also a rationalist, and he argues for theism. So here we have these axioms that exist that both of them work off of. So again, rationalism could not ultimately be a test for God because you have two different systems using rationalism arriving at very different views of God. Spinoza arriving at a pantheistic view of God, that all is God, and Descartes arriving at a theistic view of God. These can't be adjudicated between each other with respect to rationalism. So it is ultimately an inadequate test for truth. Then there's truth with regard to the issue of applying truth to God, of Kierkegaard, who put forth the notion of fideism. Fideism is not really a test for truth, but it is a claim, and it claims that this is true because I believe it is true. Stating that all I need to do is to have faith. I don't need any rational reasoning or argumentation or evidence behind it. We simply believe everything about God, and it's true because I believe it. But either a fideist offers reasons or he does not offer reasons. There's no way in this system to adjudicate conflicting beliefs. There's just an existential belief or not an existential belief that exists. If the fideist does not offer any reasons, then it's ultimately unreasonable. But if he offers reasons for his fideism, then he's ultimately not a fideist. I think also that this view confuses belief in and versus belief that. Later at the end of the class we'll do the issue of faith and reason and the distinction between belief in and belief that. But I think it's worth noting that there are apologetics or argumentation can show that certain things are true, but this does not in any way force the person to believe in those things. In is an act of the will, while believing that is an act of the mind. And I think that what fideism does is it takes belief in, which is an act of the will, and applies it to the mind, thinking this is the only kind of belief that exists. Ultimately, again, this doesn't put forward a test for truth, and there's no way to adjudicate in this system between conflicting beliefs that people may have. One person believes this, that God is pantheistic, another person believes that God is theistic. How is one to adjudicate which belief is right? This can't do it. Then there's evidentialism. Evidentialism says that there are no facts that are self-interpreting. All facts are interpreted by the context of a worldview. This we agree with. If, for example, we could note that we could demonstrate, let's say hypothetically, to an atheist that Jesus was raised from the dead. We could also do the same thing to a pantheist. We could show a pantheist that Jesus was raised from the dead. And we could also demonstrate this to a theist. that Jesus of Nazareth was raised from the dead. If we amount all this historical evidence and show it to the atheists and pantheists, let's say that they're all convinced that Jesus did indeed raise from the dead. But nowhere in all the historical evidence is there anything that forces the atheist to concede that God raised Jesus from the dead, the theistic God raised Jesus from the dead. An atheist can certainly say it's an anomaly, it's a rare event that's simply unexplained to date. That being the case, nothing there with regards to the resurrection of Jesus from the dead none of the evidence forces the atheist to concede that God exists. Same thing with the pantheist. If they're a Hindu, for example, nothing in my evidence for Jesus being raised from the dead, historically speaking, forces the pantheist to accept the theistic God. In fact, he can incorporate Jesus into his pantheon of God in terms of polytheism or even a pantheistic understanding, and look at Jesus now as a guru to be added among the millions of gurus or gods that they already have in their pantheon of gods. Again, nothing forces them to do it. Only the theist who has the correct worldview in place can conclude from the evidential evidence that God raised him from the dead. So again, evidentialism itself, or evidence itself, and the same thing would exist whether we're dealing with science or we're dealing with history, the natural world evidence versus historical evidence, both of them, the facts themselves are not interpreting. The facts are not raw. The facts don't force someone to come into a worldview. So evidentialism is insufficient in terms of adjudicating between worldviews or forcing someone to go to another worldview based on the evidence itself, whether it's historical or even scientific. For the next one, experientialism, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who is looked at as the founder or father of liberal theology, put forth this notion. Plotinus also put forward the notion of looking towards experience. We know truth by our experience, they would say. But this does not eliminate other worldviews. This can't be used to eliminate, because one can have a genuine experience in a pantheistic worldview versus a theistic worldview. The experiences, again, are not self-justifying, nor are they self-interpreting. They're legitimate and adequate for the person in those different worldviews, and the experiences themselves can't adjudicate between the worldviews. Any more than Jell-O can make its own mold, experience can't establish the truth of one worldview over against another worldview. Since experience is subject to different expressions, it cannot be an adequate test for truth. It can be expressed in many different worldviews, and again, it cannot adjudicate between the worldviews. So experientialism itself is inadequate. Private experiences cannot be a test for truth either, since the test we are after is a public or a transferable test. Now, this isn't to negate a Christian's testimony with regards to what God has done in their life. That certainly is important in a certain context, but it's not ultimately to be used as a test for truth. It can certainly be a testimony of what God has done, but there must be other grounds with respect to apologetics in establishing the truth of Christianity. Some would put forth the notion of pragmatism. William James put this forward, saying that what works is what is true. That which works the best should be used to know God or to understand God, and this could be perspectival. This could be to the individual or relative to the individual. But what works for one may not work for another. So here you're looking at something, again, that is not transferable from one worldview to another worldview, or can adjudicate between the worldviews. Two opposing worldviews might both work for the individual, both work for different people, and there's no way to judge which worldview is right by the notion of pragmatism itself. How would he know which system works best and for the longest? There seems to be some notion of longevity with regards to this test that's put forth by William James and others, that we have to wait a long time to see ultimately what works. What works now for the individual down the road may not work too well and need to be abandoned. So there's a time lag with respect to this particular issue. And also denotes that it's not transferable over time to another worldview. Some would say that the application of a worldview to see if it is livable is ultimately not a justification for a worldview. Again, that's the time difference. It may be livable now, but maybe down the road it's not. So even if we introduce the notion of livability here, that doesn't establish the justification of it. Someone can live within a Hindu pantheistic worldview, and another could live within be livable within a theistic worldview. If that's the case and they're both livable, then that's no way to adjudicate on the basis of livability. Some things ultimately work well, but they're not right. So works or pragmatism as a test for truth in itself is not a correct way, because there is not a correct approach, because there's some things that work well, such as cheating. It gets me an A on my test or a good grade on my test, but it's not right, but it's very pragmatic. Other things may work in the short run, like lying about something may ultimately help me in the short run, but down the long run it could run into a lot of problems, and so it could work in the short time, but ultimately lying is wrong, and there could be consequences to it with respect to the long run. So there's nothing in pragmatism that we can really take out as an adequate test for truth. That which works itself is, in a certain sense, as put forth as a test for truth, is self-destructive as well, because it ultimately doesn't work as a test for truth. Then there's the issue of combinationalism. Combinationalism, also known as systematic consistency. Again, if you remember, combinationalism combines two or more of the other systems together in order to arrive at a test for truth about God or a worldview. Systematic consistency ultimately is not able to eliminate the other worldviews. For example, both pantheism and theism are consistent to explain the experience of their adherents, but there's no way to adjudicate using combinationalism, using systematic consistency, the pantheistic understanding and the theistic understanding. It could help you be consistent within those worldviews, and the most it could possibly do is show that one is more systematic consistent than the other, but that still doesn't adjudicate between the worldviews. It really ultimately begs the question if they just assume, because they just have to assume that their worldview is correct. If I look at all the other systems and start to take aspects of them and put together, recognizing that the other systems are inadequate, I've got to answer the question of why combining inadequate tests for truth gives me an adequate test for truth. If I put two leaky buckets together, they're not going to hold any more water than one leaky bucket, so it really doesn't solve the problem ultimately. Ultimately, you must correct the other tests, not just combine them together. You must correct what is inherently wrong in the other test in order to arrive at a test that is ultimately true. Combining other inadequate tests for truth ultimately does not help, as I illustrated with the leaky buckets, as well as putting forth the challenge that they have to answer what is inherently wrong with the other inadequate views, not just combine them together. It's also worth pointing out that no one person is in possession of all the data about a system. I can't know the theistic system or even the pantheism or some other worldview. I can't know all about those systems, all the data, and everything in them. So even if it was put forward as a test with regards to systematic consistency, even if it was adequate, there's no way I, as a finite human being, could know all about a system to know if it really truly was internally systematically consistent, because I can't, as a finite human being, know even a complete theistic system or pantheistic system. That leads back to the point I made earlier with the fact that the best you could do is show that one, based on my knowledge of the system, is more consistent than another. But again, this does not allow us to adjudicate between different systems. Now, there's a difference between a theory and a test for truth, as we've put forth a theory or understanding with regards to the correspondence understanding of truth, but there is a difference between that and a test for truth. The theory of truth, that is a definition of truth, is what truth is. That is the very nature of truth, which we've defended the correspondence view of truth. But a test for truth is a defense of a truth, that something is true, a defense of truth, how we know it is so. And the thing we want to do here is to put forth a test for truth. Another way to look at it, we have two aspects of truth. One deals with its nature, the other is a test. The nature deals with what truth is and shows us the definition. The test shows us how we arrive at truth and how it ultimately is discovered. There's really only one adequate test for truth, with various aspects to the one adequate test for truth that we can put forward, as Dr. Geiser explains in great detail with respect to this issue. One is the notion of unaffirmability. This is a test for falsity. There are two aspects of unaffirmability. One is a direct unaffirmability, such as if I say, I cannot think. That, as we've used before in evaluation, is self-defeating. It's self-defying. It implodes upon itself. It self-destructs on itself. If I say I cannot think, that itself is a thought, a thinking that is produced by thinking. There's also the notion of indirect unaffirmability, the first one being direct unaffirmability, where it self-destructs. The one that deals with indirect unaffirmability says that I know that one cannot know anything about reality. That in and of itself is not directly self-defeating, but we would say that the process by which one went through to get to that is simply flawed. With regard to indirect unaffirmability, the process by which the statement is derived contradicts the expression. If true, it cannot ever come to affirm it. There's no basis for making the statement. How could the statement be made unless he did know reality? So again, with unaffirmability, it's simply a test for falsity. Is this false? It can be direct or indirect. With respect to it being direct, I cannot think is self-defeating. With regard to it being indirect unaffirmability, I know that one cannot know anything about reality. The process that led us to that is simply undeniable. It is simply the process that went through that is self-defeating, not the statement itself. The second aspect of the adequate test for truth is its undeniability as a test for truth. This has two aspects as well. One is definitional and the other one is existential. The definitional aspect of undeniability is something like triangles have three sides. It's true by definition. It doesn't say that there are any triangles in the world. It's not making a claim to the fact that there are any triangles, but if there is a triangle that exists, we define it as having three sides and not anything else. Hence, this is the notion of definitional undeniability. The other aspect of undeniability is existential undeniability. This, for example, would be existence. For example, I must exist to make the denial of my existence. I exist in the process of denying my existence. If I say, for example, I do not exist. Existence does not mean logical, but actual. It's the case that I actually do exist. Whether I affirm my existence or I deny my existence, in either case, I actually do exist. So it's existentially undeniable. This, again, is a first principle that we will make extensive use of. It's existentially undeniable in the sense that it's grounded in reality. This test for truth and the aspects thereof come from the notion of realism, if we have to put a name on it. In the Aristotelian and Thomistic sense, these have to do with realism as a test for truth, or these are aspects or breakdown of the overall view that is referred to as realism. So we come now to the application of truth itself. Unaffirmability, as we've stated, can falsify a worldview or a claim about God or a claim about a certain worldview, and undeniability can verify a worldview or a claim about God or a claim about the world, and this is the only adequate test that we have ultimately for truth. But one would then ask, what is true within a worldview? If this is what we use to adjudicate between worldviews, and since it's grounded in reality and the understanding of realism in a metaphysical understanding, we might then ask, what do we do about when we establish the worldview? How do we establish what is true within that particular worldview? It's here when we must take from systematic consistency. The test we apply must be systematic consistency, the test within a worldview. The reason that is the case is whatever is most consistently and comprehensively expressed in that system must be true within the system itself. If that system includes a certain life view about how one should live or what one should do, then that itself becomes something as an expression of the truth which can be tested with regard to systematic consistency. So systematic consistency ultimately is extremely important. It is very important in terms of adequately assessing within a worldview what is true with respect to the inner workings of the worldview. Whatever is most consistent in the system is true. Whatever is inconsistent in the system is false. But it's also worth pointing out, as we did with regards to the issue of combinationalism, that no finite mind can have all the facts. I can't even know my own worldview, such as theism, comprehensively. That ultimately is something that only God can do. So again, there are limits on this particular notion, but it is sufficient enough to put forward the notion that whatever best fits systematically and consistently should be accepted as true within the worldview. That must suffice it, because that's all that we can do. So again, to reiterate, we have a test that enables us to adjudicate between worldviews, which is unaffirmability and undeniability, and then we have a test that we can use within a worldview to know what is true, and this is systematic consistency. To conclude, what we've done so far in our outline for the overall apologetic argument is simply to deal with the issue of truth and show that truth about reality is knowable. We did that by showing that truth is undeniable, truth is absolute, and in this sense it is something that is objective, and truth is best understood correctly as that which corresponds to reality. A test for truth can be applied to adjudicate between worldviews. We looked at that which is put forward as a test for truth which fails, and put forth our own adequate test for truth, which is grounded in realism or being, existential undeniability that something exists. This can be used to adjudicate between worldviews and ultimately establish a correct worldview, and then we put forth an internal test of systematic consistency to show that which is true within the true worldview. And these are the only tests for truth that we have that we can use in terms of doing apologetics.